You just heard our guest of honor tell you to come up, sit up front, and that is the polite thing to do, is to do what the guest of honor tells you to do, I think. We're going to start in a couple of minutes, so find yourselves a seat. Zach, can you give me a little more volume? And can we check Bob's mic?
You want to check me?
Yeah, would you?
Good evening.
Is that your Cronkite?
This old correspondent is happy to be here.
That's not bad. Summer Wiley, it says, has your name on it. Come on in. And there's Delaney. Hello, Delaney. Welcome. We're going to start in just 2 minutes. Usually Writers House programs start right on the money. But given the times we live in and how so many processes you go through, we'll just start in a couple of minutes. Is that Dan? Hi, Dan. Somebody came up all the way from Washington, D.C. for this event. You guys got all quiet now. Keep talking for a few more minutes. My name is Al Filreis, as most of you know, and the Writers House people have been buzzing all week, Bob Scheiffer, about this, because not only was Bob Scheiffer going to be coming, but this was an occasion for us to decide, because the temperatures are starting to get a little cooler, to move inside. So you have masks on. Bob and I, with apologies, won't have our masks on, but we're sitting kind of far from you. And we're indoors. This is great. It's like an old Writers House program. So give yourselves a big hand for coming out to an event in a room with other human beings. So I want to set up a couple of things at the beginning, and then we're just going to get right into it, because I think both of us are excited about having a conversation. The basic structure will be, I'll have some questions, pretty wide open questions for Bob Scheiffer. And then there'll come a point where I will turn to you for a question or two, and then I'll take it back and ask another question, and we'll go from there. And we'll kind of take the temperature of the room after an hour and 5 minutes to see how you're doing. We might go a little longer than that. And then we're going to, is Alley Katz in the area? We're going to, I think, retire to the garden. The garden for a reception. So it's, last I checked, it was 57 degrees, so it should be fine out there. And we'll have a reception. Please stay, and this will be an opportunity for you to get to talk to Bob Scheiffer. So we're really pleased that you came. We have some books of Bob's for sale in the other room, and so afterwards you can rush out and buy one of them, and I'll bet that, I didn't ask him this, but I bet he'd be willing to inscribe it.
I will.
Okay, good.
And I must say, I didn't know you had books for sale.
I didn't either until they gave them to me. But
well, good for you.
So one of them is Overload, Finding the Truth in Today's Deluge of News. Yes, and an understatement that is an issue. And then these are the favorite stories from the first, just say, 50 years. 50 years. Face the Nation, and another great photo. My wife Jane, who is here, looked at this. This is not for sale. This is my copy. This is Bob's memoir. This just in. And Jane, did I get this wrong? Jane designs books. This is just about the best cover photo of a person that a book designer.
Yeah, I thought it was a great portrait.
Just a fabulous portrait.
Well, it's the one part of the book I had nothing to do with. It is Neil Nyron, who was my editor, and he's responsible for that.
Would you do me a favor and bring the mic closer
sure.
to you? Okay, so we agreed there would not be I feel like a fancy introduction would be appropriate for such an eminence, but we're going to discard that and get right to the talk. Because I guess Bob's eminence came about through a lot of hard work and being in the right place at the right time, and not through fancy introductions. But you all know, I'm going to just say one thing that I learned from the memoir, which I kind of knew as a watcher of network news. Either the only person, or the only person anyone can remember, who was a lead correspondent at the Defense Department, the Pentagon, the Congress, the White House, and the State Department, all four. I don't think people aspire to that quadfecta, but wow, is that all the introduction you need? Bob Scheiffer, let's welcome him to the Writer's House. I want to begin, Bob, by acknowledging that you took the pains, you and Pat took the pains to bring to us some of the paintings that you've done, and there's going to be a time in the next hour and 5 minutes where I'm going to ask you about these. I have a feeling that someone from the audience is going to ask about the January 6th collage painting with its Caligula up top. So I think probably that will get taken care of. I'm very interested in your John McCain portrait and your relationship with John. We'll get to that. My first question is about your trip to Vietnam for the Star-Telegram, Fort Worth. It was kind of something that happened to you because you really begged to do it. It was probably unwise in terms of the safety of your own life, but it introduced you to a whole world.
Yeah.
And my question for you is, what was it like as a young reporter who was there really trying to find the Texans who were fighting that war and tell people back home what was happening to them? But along the way, you noticed that the briefings, the military briefings and the government, U.S. government briefings were, I don't know if you think they were full of lies, but they were not telling the story. No. What was that like for a young reporter to find out that the government wasn't telling the truth?
Well, it was eye-opening, I guess would be one way to put it. I mean, I talked to Star-Telegram, which was my hometown newspaper. I was the police reporter there and had been for a while, and I talked them into sending me to Vietnam. And they hadn't sent anyone overseas since World War II, and so this was not exactly something they wanted to spend money on. So as part of my remarkable sales presentation, I offered to go over there, pay my own way over there, and then said, if I do that, would you hire me when I get there? And they kind of, I think they were a little embarrassed about that. And so anyway, they sent me to Vietnam, and it was totally different. And mind you, this was 1965, and it wasn't like I worked for NBC or CBS. I knew I'd read one book about Vietnam when I went over there, and now I can't even.
It was a novel.
Yeah, and
Graham Greene.
Graham Greene, yeah.
The Ugly American?
The Ugly American. And that was pretty much my sole knowledge of Vietnam. So I get to Tan Son Nhut Airport, and I had this 80-pound suitcase, and this was in the days before they put rollers on suitcases. And it was so hot, I started sweating and looked down, and I had sweated through my leather shoes. And I didn't know where to go. I finally got a cab. They put this enormous suitcase on top of the cab. And the driver said, "Where?" And I said, "Take me to Saigon." And he said, "You in Saigon?" I didn't know where to go. So I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I said, "Take me to the Associated Press office." And so I went there, and the kindly people there, Ed White, who was the bureau chief, took me in and said, we have some rooms at the Continental Palace Hotel, and you can stay there until you can find a place. So at least I had a place to sleep. And so, I started out, as you always do, going to the briefings, and they seemed quite detailed and all of that. And then after I was there a while, I began to go out in the field. And I remember I went on a bombing run. There were the Air Force had had bought these old prop planes from the Navy. They were the last propeller-driven planes that the Navy flew off of aircraft carriers, and they were going to junk them. The Air Force bought them because you could go up and fly around in them for 4 or 5 hours. They didn't burn much fuel, and they were dive bombers. So I went with these guys, and we stayed out all day and came back. And I think finally we dropped a bomb on something that looked like a chicken shed or something like that, and hit a couple of other things. It didn't amount to very much. And when I got back, I actually went to the briefing the next day to see if there was anything, and sure enough, they had some reports of they destroyed so many enemy, what do you call them, ammo dumps or something like that, but it just didn't jive, and that's what happened to us in Vietnam. You know, what happened was we weren't winning. So we invented all of these statistics to show that we were winning. The problem was that didn't make any difference. The statistics meant nothing. And I think the great fault that I and the rest of the press corps made about Vietnam, we didn't ask the key question. And that was not, are we winning? Because if you're winning, it's evident. You know it. It's obvious. If you're not winning, you know it. And so I think that was the first mistake we made. We just asked the wrong basic question. And somehow or another, in every story that I've covered, there always seems to be one basic question. And if you can ever get your hands on that, it makes the rest of it easier to understand. I wish I'd asked that question, but nobody did. Because they kept bombarding us with these statistics, the body counts, and all the number of chickens that were killed in a raid on a chicken coop or something. I mean, it got to the point of silliness, and it would have been silly, except it was so bad. People were losing their lives where this happened.
Completely astonishing beginning to a career that you were at this paper. They didn't really think that they should be sending somebody to Vietnam. You talked them into it, and it was quite dangerous, and you kept that from them as long as you could, that it was dangerous. So the next time things are really dangerous, you are covering James Meredith's matriculation at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
That got really dangerous for you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, it's a long time ago, can you tell us what it felt like to see racist hatred be that violent, be that intense, and you watched it, you were there?
When mobs rule, when a mob takes over, that's when it really gets dangerous.
Like this thing here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the name of that painting is Caligula's Drop By, and I think all being Penn students, you know that Caligula was the Roman emperor who made his horse a member of the Senate. And
not to put too fine a point on it.
but there you have it. And I mean, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I'll tell you something else about that. The reason I painted that painting, when I watched that unfold, I was at home. By that time, I'm retired, and I'm watching, from offshore, as they say. But I was absolutely appalled. I mean, and this was before anybody began to talk about, does this have anything to do with Donald Trump? This was just a bunch of hooligans who had walked into the United States Capitol, which is one of our most cherished symbols of our democracy. I covered the Congress for about 15 or 16 years. I'd go up there every day. I had walked up and down those halls hundreds of times. So that's where you talk. I love the covering. We were talking about, I covered all the beats. To me, the Capitol, covering Congress, is my all-time favorite beat. A lot of people think the White House is great, and it is. It's a lot of fun. I mean, you get great luggage tags that say, White House Press and all that kind of stuff. But before Donald Trump, and all that changed when Trump came, but before that, everybody in the White House worked for one guy. So it's very hard to get the other side of the story. When you're up at the Capitol, people just come up and they want to tell you things, and you can find every side to every story there. And plus, it's really the last place in Washington where you don't have to go through a press secretary or all of that. You just, stand outside the door, and when the guy comes out, you ask him a question. You get on the elevator, you ask him a question. We used to get on the elevator with Joe Biden, and he wouldn't let us off the elevator. He was just one of these guys that started talking and never stopped. But that's beside the point. But you're asking me about
and James Meredith. You
Meredith.
saw it. You
I was
hid.
there.
You had to hide out with one of your colleagues.
Yes.
I think the cameraman was assaulted.
Yeah, I mean, I got pushed around. I got knocked down, but it didn't amount to very much. But that night, we were all caught out on the in kind of this open area there in front of the administration building, and two snipers got up on the roof of one of the dorms and started shooting down into the crowd, and two people got killed that night. One of them had been sent down there because the guy, he was an Agence France Presse, I think, who somebody had gone off on vacation or something, and he got sent down to replace the guy. He wasn't even supposed to be working, and he was shot. Nobody ever found out who shot him. And the other person who was killed was a maintenance man who'd come to fix the Coke machine in one of the dorms, and he had heard all this noise and walked out there to see what this was all about. And he got a bullet, and they burned cars. And I think, and I was in Vietnam for nearly 6 months, and I think the night that I spent on that campus was literally the most terrifying, including the time that I was in Vietnam. I'll never forget it. And it really, I had gotten out, I had worked when I was in college. I'd worked the last 2 years of college at a little radio station in Fort Worth, and we had these what we call mobile units. There were panel trucks, and they had police radios in them. And when we heard, we called it, our beat it was a 3R beat: rapes, wrecks, and robberies. When we saw any of those things come up on the police radio, we went and investigated them, and did a report, a live report. And this was thought to be quite something in those days. I mean, this was before all of the technology that we have today. But down there, I thought, and I drove. They sent me down there. We already had a reporter down there at Ole Miss, and they sent me down there to help him. And I drove one of our mobile units down there. And it had the name of our station on the side and everything, KXOL, the station that pioneered and developed on the scene news coverage in the Great Southwest and all that kind of thing. And when I got up there, people started throwing rocks and beer bottles, and I thought, well, maybe they'll think I'm from the South. I mean, I came from Texas. We don't consider that part of the South. If you're from Texas, you're from Texas. But I thought, maybe they'd
Cut you some slack.
A little bit of a pass on this. There was none of that. They didn't want anybody that they didn't know there. And by this time, most of them were drunk before dark, and so that only just increased the tension. And some of the demonstrators got into a tractor, a bulldozer that had been there because they'd been working on the campus, and had got that thing started up and headed toward the building there, and it ran out of gas. But you had these U.S. Marshals that were surrounding the place, and President Kennedy, or Bobby Kennedy, who was the Attorney General, had sent these federal marshals down there because they didn't want a military presence. They didn't want the sight of uniforms. Well, everybody down there liked military uniforms, and I think they would have been much safer and a much wiser force to deploy. But finally, the 101st Airborne had been dispatched to Memphis, and they finally got there and finally restored order. And one of my favorite stories in that book, we kept hearing that they were sending military forces down there as this riot began to get get worse and worse. And we couldn't figure out where they were. Well, I talked to the lieutenant. He was from the New Jersey National Guard, and they had sent him down there. And I said, what took you guys so long? And he said, well, we didn't know where it was. And he said, we had no maps. And he said, they put me in charge of this group, and as we drove out the gate, he said, I stopped at a gas station when we got to Mississippi and got a road map. In those days, that's where you got a map. You got it from the gas station. And he said, so we got a map, and he said, that's how we found the damn place. And people say, well, you read things in the paper, you hear things, you say, how in the world did that happen? Sometimes it happens just for reasons like that. And I never forget, in my years covering the Pentagon, one day I was in the spokesman for the Pentagon in those days was a guy named Jerry Friedheim, and he was a very good guy. Mel Laird was Secretary of Defense. And I was giving him the business about something or other. And he said, Bob, let me tell you something. He said, yeah, there are conspiracies and stuff like that. But he said, every once in a while we just do dumb things, and that's why they happen. And that, to me, is something that I've always, I think I learned as a reporter. And it's true. Sometimes people just do dumb stuff. And it's just all part of the deal.
In your case, your career begins, we'll call it dumb luck then, with the two main issues of the era, Vietnam, civil rights, those two stories that we just, and that is quite a powerful beginning. Now we skip forward, you're now at CBS, and it's Nixon's FCC, led by a guy named Dean Birch. Am I getting that name right? Yeah. Okay. So the Nixon White House didn't take kindly to the networks doing what they call what did they call that? The instant
analysis.
Instant analysis. And so the Nixon watched, and he decided he didn't like, I think it was Marvin Kalb first was doing an analysis of the letter from Ho Chi Minh, which Nixon thought was, well, anyway, Marvin Kalb thought it's actually softer than Nixon is saying in this speech that Nixon was giving. Yeah. What happened next appalled you and all of your colleagues.
Well, they announced we weren't going to have instant analysis after that.
And so the White House can tell the networks, or tries to tell the networks, you can't do instant analysis, demanded transcripts.
Yeah.
And Dean Birch threatened the heads of the networks.
Yeah, it was very serious. And what was interesting about it was that William Paley, who owned CBS in those days, and Richard S. Salant, who was the president of CBS News, they were aware of this pressure before those of us who were reporters actually realized how serious it was. And the reason why is that they kept it to themselves. They didn't want us to know about it because they didn't want it to color our stories. And number two, they didn't want us to be afraid. And so they really kept it from us. I always remember the president of CBS News, which Mr. Paley had handpicked, and now his name I can't recall his name. He later was the president of Muhlenberg College. I'll think of it. You're dealing with an 84-year-old person here, and sometimes the information is in there, but it gets pushed to the back of the corner or something. But anyway, Ehrlichman once had him over to the White House and said,
was it Frank Stanton?
No. Frank Stanton was Paley's contemporary. It was the two of them. It was the guy that came after him. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Ehrlichman said to him, "You've got to stop this." And he said, "I can't stop them from reporting." And he said, "Well, why can't you?" He said, "If I told them to stop, they would report it." And I have told that story over the years, and people say to me, "Well, wait a minute now. Wait a minute now." And I said, well, let me explain something to you, how journalism works. Maybe we wouldn't have reported it, but NBC might have come up with an exclusive story from sources in a position to know, and they would have reported it. There's no way you can get a story
So
that
how-
kind of thing a secret, and that's it. I mean, you know, you can't keep secrets like that.
How did
and
Nixon's-
reporters will always find a way.
How did Nixon's people, this was insane because he really made something out of nothing. How did they misread? They were so autocratic and so reactive. How did they misread how the press, how the networks would handle their the FCC chief calling people in the middle of the night, telling them to back off? That's not going to work.
No, and you do wonder how in the world could they be so uninformed about how things really worked. Can I use this as an excuse to tell you about my exclusive interview with Richard Nixon?
Please.
When I first came, this may help you understand this. When I first came to Washington, I'd just been hired, and I was sent over, and since I was the low man on the totem pole, people don't remember this. But the fact is, the Nixon administration used to have church services every Sunday in the White House. And they would send out these invitations, and people would come. They'd send it to their friends. It was a big deal, you know, to get invited to the White House and all that. And they would sing a hymn, and then the president might say a few words, and then they'd say amen or whatever, and then everybody would line up and go shake hands with the president. So Helen Thomas was the reporter for UPI, and those of you of a certain age will remember Helen. She was one of the great characters in the history of Washington journalism. So Helen would always get sent over there on Sunday morning, and I would get sent over there because I was the rookie for CBS. And most of the time, it'd just be the two of us. I logged a lot of church time in that first year at CBS News. So anyway, we're there, and Helen turned to me when one of these things was breaking up and said, "Let's go up and shake hands with the president. We'll ask him a question." I said, "Helen, we're not supposed to do that. That's for the guys." She said, "Just come on. Just act like you belong here." And so we walk up, and I said, "I don't have any questions." She said, "You'll think of something." So I got up. Well, there was this story going around that the White House was going to bring in some new advisors, and we didn't know where they were coming from, outside the government or inside the government or what. So when I walked up there and shook hands with the president, I said, "Mr. President, these advisors, will they be inside advisors?" "Oh, no," he said, "these will be outhouse advisors." Then he said, "No, wait a minute, that's not what I meant." And he became so flustered that he just, small talk, he just couldn't do it, that he just turned around and walked off. And I'd been in Washington a week. And I scared the president off. I didn't know what to do about it or what to think about it. And Helen, she didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. She said, "That's pretty good. I'm going to write that." But
Bob,
anyway.
I love that story. Actually, my next question follows nicely from that, since your Nixon impersonation crept in there. I read this book. I also listened to it, and you read the audio.
I did.
Yes. And when we got to your profile of Walter Cronkite, there's a great line, which I'm going to have you read from the book, a great line, and I could hear you, even in the audio book, I can hear you, a little Cronkite was creeping in there. So what I want to do is ask that question, and then one other pretty serious one, and then I want to open it to the group for some questions, and then I'm going to take it back, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the painting, and also we're going to do a lightning round. Okay. A lightning round, kind of a game. I say a name from Bob's career, and he gives us a quick take response to. You still up for that game?
If I choose, I'll answer.
Okay. No, you can. I'll give you three, and you can pick one.
Let me tell you, one of the things, here's some good advice. One thing I've learned is you don't have to answer every question.
No. My students are in the room. What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, so, all right. So what I want to ask you to do is read this paragraph about Walter, and it ends with the quote, and I'm sure that your impersonation will come into play. It's the one that I've marked there. This is Walter Cronkite. Oh, you lost the spot, Bob. I
Trying
think
to get my glasses
I
here.
think I got it though. Got it written down. 271.
I know
Can't do that kind of stuff on the air, can you?
271.
271. Here it is. It's the part that's blocked with my pen. Oh, glasses are coming up, Bob.
Here we go.
Try mine. I don't know if they're strong enough, but you
No, that's mine, aren't they?
can try 'em.
Isn't that mine?
No.
No?
You can see if they're not.
Walter dominated television as no other correspondent before or after, and I've always believed a big part of his success grew out of his curiosity, and second, out of the fact that he couldn't hide his love for the news. He never left the impression that he thought he was smarter than the viewers, only that he had done his homework and was working hard to get the story for them. Walter loved the job, and his viewers knew it. He had been my hero before I came to CBS, and what made me admire him even more, that he was that rare individual who was exactly the same on camera and off. He called me with a question once when I was working at the White House beat, and for once I had an answer. To which he responded, "Well, Bob, thank you. This old gray head just had a question mark above it."
And there's your Walter Cronkite impersonation. I've been.
And you know, he really talked that way. I mean, he really did. I mean, it was the damnedest thing, and we just loved him. But he just loved the job, and I think that's why people trusted him so much.
Yeah.
And they did. You know,
Yeah.
at one point, the survey showed he was the most trusted man in America, and he was always my hero. And I just really loved him. And when I walked into CBS and got to work for him, it was like a little league player suddenly walking into Yankee Stadium or someplace, you know. And I was kind of the rookie of that great bureau in those days. But if I ever knew that I wanted to be a reporter, that's when I really, really knew. And I that's what I always wanted to be, even when I, you know, in college and high school and all of that. My mother, unfortunately, her great dream was that I would be. It was the great dream of every mother of those days to be able to talk about my son, the doctor. So she was a very formidable woman, and so I enrolled and started out in pre-med. And so when people ask me, well, what really led you to journalism, I always say comparative anatomy. That's where I knew this was not going to be anything that I was going to do. And sure enough, I didn't. And
Before I switch to my question, which will follow with a question from the audience, you left, or you moved from focusing on pre-med at TCU, and then you went to work and at the radio station, I guess. And
yes.
how much per hour or per week did you earn?
$1 an hour. But
And
that was
overtime?
that was only for the first 40 hours. I don't know how they got away with this. I've never heard of anything like it since. But the first hour of overtime paid 90 cents. The second hour was 80 cents. The third hour was 70 cents, and the fourth hour of overtime was 60 cents. And we always, no one ever did it, but we always said that if we worked 11 hours, we'd have to pay them a dime, you know. But
At some point, it didn't become worthwhile anymore. That's amazing. All right, I want my next question. We're switching moods here. This is a very serious moment in the nation's time in the 20th century. This was when McGovern nominated Tom Eagleton to be his vice presidential candidate. Later, when you were preparing your memoir, you went and talked to all these people, and McGovern was one of them. And he regretted, I think he regretted not sticking with Eagleton. And this was, of course, as Bob will no doubt tell you in responding to my question, Eagleton had suffered from depression. He'd been treated, and I think there was some electroshock treatment prior. He made the mistake of not telling the presidential candidate that he had suffered from mental illness. The question for all of us would be, if a vice presidential candidate were nominated and there'd been a history of mental illness in the past, would that be disqualifying? I think McGovern felt later that it should not have been. I wonder what your thoughts are about that whole story, how it was handled, how you feel about it now, what it was like to talk to McGovern all those years later.
It was very interesting, and that's what I tried to do when I wrote that book. I didn't want it to be just about me, because I didn't think that. I mean, I had some funny stories to tell, but I didn't think that was enough to make a book. And I wanted to find out what the people who also shared in these events that I covered, starting, my first campaign was 1972. I'd been to the 1968 Democratic Convention, and I just wanted to know what their thoughts were. And I spent an entire day, one of the best days of my life, with Eugene McCarthy. And he was an old man, but then to hear him go back and talk about some of the things that happened to them, and McGovern especially. McGovern was a very smart man, but he really had no chance. I mean, he was out of the mainstream of the Democratic Party. He had a great story to tell. This was a guy that blew something like 40 bomber missions in World War II. And he never talked about that because he thought that people would think he was pro-army or pro-military, and Vietnam was going on, and the Vietnam crowd didn't like stories like that, so he never talked about that. But he was a very humane person, and I sincerely liked him. I really did, and it was the same. I went back and talked to Eagleton.
You did, that's right.
Yeah, and I went back and talked to all of them in that part. McCarthy, Melvin Laird, who I always thought, who was Secretary of Defense and was my first Secretary of Defense to cover, who I came to believe was probably the second best politician that I knew in all my years. The first best was Lyndon Johnson. There was nobody better than Lyndon Johnson. And what Johnson had was this ability to explain to people why they really needed to be on his side. And he also would explain why it would be a really bad idea to be on the other guy's side. I remember one time Frank Church, who was a very nice man, a senator from Idaho, and he was, I guess, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he went to Johnson, and Johnson was having a lot of trouble with the William Fulbright then, who was kind of the anti-war force on Capitol Hill, and so Church was telling Johnson about all the good things that Senator Fulbright was doing, and to which Johnson replied, "Frank, the next time you need a dam out there in Idaho, go check with Bill Fulbright and see if he can help you." And he just didn't mind telling people. But that's the fun part of being a politician, is to get to know and learn things like that. Not of being a politician, but covering politicians. It's very different now. It's very different now on Capitol Hill. The partisanship now is so high. It's never been like this. This is not normal. If there's one thing I want to leave you with, it is what we're going through now and what we've been through over these recent years is not normal in the way it just isn't. And we simply have to find some way to begin to agree on things. And if we can't, I think that is the greatest danger right now that is posed to the American Republic. If we can't find some way to come together on the major issues, we're going to go the way of the Roman Empire. No democracy can sustain itself in this kind of a, we are the oldest continuing democracy. We're the only one in the history of the world that hasn't collapsed. So we need to keep that in mind as we view the current news.
I'm going to guess that one of the reasons why you admire John McCain so much
Yes.
is that he was not towing the line all the time,
Yeah.
and that he was independent. Can you tell us, before we open it up, can you tell us a little bit about that painting and what you're trying to achieve with that, and why McCain as a subject?
I knew two genuine heroes in my time. One was John Lewis, whose picture is right back over there, and the other was John McCain. And what those two men shared was courage. And I always liked the way John McCain put it. He said, courage is not the absence of fear, but the capacity to act in spite of our fears. And I think that really is something all of us could take to heart. John Lewis felt the same way. John Lewis was beaten 13 times in demonstrations. He was arrested more than 40 times. On the 50th anniversary of his walk across the Selma Bridge, I walked across with him, and I went down and did a story about it, and we just walked across it together and talked. And he knew what was going to happen to him when he walked across that bridge. And he told me that day, he said, because he was the first one they hit, and they hit him square in the head with a belly club. He said, I thought I died. He said, I have no idea how I got from there to the hospital and to the church where I finally wound up. But he said, I thought, this is it. I've died. And he was just one of the most remarkable people that I've ever run across. And he was just fascinating to be with, because he was calm. He didn't hold himself out to be something special. He just demonstrated that you're not going to stop me with a billy club. And had it not been for the Selma March, the 64 Civil Rights Bill and the 65 bill that Johnson wisely split in two, those things would not have happened had it not been for something like those people who are willing to risk their lives. And John McCain, 5.5 years in a prisoner of war camp, both arms broken. John McCain couldn't comb his own hair because he couldn't lift his arms up to touch his head. That didn't scare him. After what he'd been through, a political fight was not something that scared him. And I would also say the other thing, the good thing about him that I like so much, is that I covered his campaign in 2000 when he ran, and it was the most fun campaign I've ever been on, because we'd get on this bus, and this was called the Truth Squad, or
Does anybody remember?
Straight Talk Express.
Straight Talk Express.
Straight Talk Express.
Right.
Yeah, that's what he called his bus. We get on that thing at 8:00 in the morning, and by 8:15 he had 8 cups of coffee and was just running on straight caffeine and talking faster and faster. And he'd get us back there, and it was just a nonstop press conference. And then we get to the first stop, and he'd get off, and we'd all go get up on the platform with the cameras behind us, and he'd start in, and then he said, and all that bunch of communists back there in the back, he said, you can't trust any of them or anything that they say. We made several, shall I say, discreet hand gestures in response. Some people would actually go like this. But he liked us. He knew what our job was, and we knew what his job was, and we knew they were not the same job. And people used to ask me, what do you like most about McCain? And I always said, I can always find him. Most of the politicians, when the news is good or in their favor, you have no trouble finding them. They're knocking on your door to get in and tell you about themselves. But when the news turns bad, it's amazing. They just seem to be out of touch. You can't find them. You could always find McCain. And I mean, even when the news wasn't looking good, I could call him up and say, "Come be on Face the Nation." He said, "What time do you want me to be there?" You know, and that was why I respected him so much. He was truly a great man, and so was John Lewis.
Thank you for those reflections on the two Johns. We'll open it up for some questions. I think we have a mic, a portable mic, that will catch your voice. Yes, do you mind standing up? Maybe say who you are if you want.
Hi, I'm Sidney Ozer from Philadelphia and have loved watching Bob Scheiffer over the years. You've talked about bipartisanship in terms of the political sense and how things got done in the Capitol and the halls of the White House. But can you talk a little bit about personal relationships between people on both sides of the aisle, be they Texas Ranger fans or be they John McCain and Joe Biden?
Yeah. Talk about, you mean the relation? Well,
Personal bipartisanship.
yeah. Well, you know, all those years that I covered the Capitol, I mean, I am a registered independent. I grew up in Texas. There was no Republican Party at the time that I was there, and the Democratic Party was split in two. There were the conservative Democrats, which were John Connally, who was the governor, Lyndon Johnson. That was kind of the conservative side, although Johnson did, do a lot of liberal things. His idea of a conservative and what might be considered a conservative day today are totally different. And then on the other side was a newspaper called the Texas Observer, and Ralph Yarborough, who was a U.S. senator. He was kind of the liberal, the leader of that wing of the party. In fact, when Kennedy came to Texas in 1960, the first thing was that Ralph Yarborough announced he wouldn't ride in the same car with John Connally. And somebody quickly explained to him maybe he needed to rethink that. But whatever the case, that's how it was. But people, I think what happened, and I think what's happened as far as the partisanship part, is that up until about the time of, I would say, Newt Gingrich and that, people would have these bad campaigns, nasty campaigns, and all of that kind of thing. But once the election was over, they'd come to Washington and they'd all sit down and they'd find a way to work together. But Washington was a very different place. People lived there in those days. The congressman's kids went to school together. The wives all knew each other. There was the social network. People knew and respected each other. And there was a lot of, jockeying around and fun things that happened. And yeah, there was a lot of partisanship, but it was all sort of contained. And as the years have gone by, and I think it is because of the continued negativity of our campaigns kept getting nastier and nastier and dirtier and more expensive until people came not to respect people on either side. Tom Friedman of the New York Times told me a story once and about going to an advertising convention, and there was one of the other hamburger networks, not companies, not McDonald's, I don't know who it was, but they had decided that they wanted to overtake McDonald's and become the #1 seller of hamburgers. And people were advancing different ways in advertising plans to go about doing that. And someone said, look, we know how effective negative advertising is in our national politics. why don't we just go negative? Why don't we say that McDonald's hamburgers have rat droppings in them and they're poisonous and they will kill you? And a wiser head said, no, we're not trying to destroy the appetite for hamburgers. We're trying to sell more than McDonald's does. And so I wonder sometimes if we, with this years of negativity that started long before Donald Trump, if we have sort of destroyed the appetite for politics, do we not believe anything from any side anymore because of these ridiculous campaign ads? I mean, if an alien, I think I put this in one of these books, if an alien came to Earth and all they knew about our campaigns and our politics was what they saw in television commercials, they would think that the only people who run for office are idiots, number one, evil people. Just think about if that's all they knew about it, and over having that pounded that over and over again into our heads. I think that is one of the reasons we have the kind of partisanship we have today. The second part of that is what I wrote Overload about. All of this is taking place in the midst of a communications revolution, a revolution in how we talk to each other, how we get our news. We've had, 2,000 newspapers in the last 15 years that have gone under. And think about this. In my friend Jim Norton, who was at the Philadelphia Inquirer for many years and worked with me at the covering the White House when President Ford was president, told me this story one time. He said, think about it this way. He said, in days gone by, most people got their news from their local newspaper. There was usually at least one television station and sometimes two in every town. They got their information from that. There was Life magazine and Time magazine and the Saturday Evening Post. Those were the national publications. They got their information from that. And from that information, from that data, that's the data they drew on to form their opinions. Well, now, when you have 600-700 channels on the television, when you have this news bombarding us from all sides, you don't know if it's true, false, or whatever it is. Everybody not only has their own information, they bring their own facts. We're not drawing our opinions from the same data. Some folks over here get their data from one source of news. Others get it from over here. And so as a result, it's just a jumble. Nobody could process the kind of information. We get more information right now than any people who've ever lived on the earth at any one time. And yet, are we wiser? Are we smarter? I don't think we are. I think we're overwhelmed. I think we're getting so much information that we simply can't process it. It is a lot like after the invention of the printing press. Martin Luther actually said the printing press is God's perfect gift. Those are his words, because he thought that once people could read the Bible in their own language and all of that all of these problems we had in the religious world would sort of go away. Well, the fact was we had 100 years of religious wars after the invention of the printing press. It took 100 years for us to kind of get it in place and understand what it did. And so I think that is part of what's happening today. And the third thing that I would say is that we simply have to just stand back sometimes and say, is this true? And not accept it simply because it's on the internet. And then there's one final thing I'll just make. from this point. We are suffering from something that humanity has suffered from since the invention of the first machine, and that is we always use the technology before we fully and totally understand it. I mean, do you think Mark Zuckerberg, when he started out with Facebook, understood or expected he'd be where they are today? No, I don't think so. And it's the same way across the communications field right now. This, and again, I just will close this little part of it by saying again, we just have to understand this is not normal what we're going through. We have been hit with kind of a triple whammy, you know, here. All of it with COVID has made nothing easier for any of us. But I think we are kind of crawling out of the hibernation we've been in for a couple of years now, and maybe things will get better. I'm hoping.
Glad you ended it with that. Thank you for the question. Let's take another question. Summer, right here, all the way up front.
Hi, Summer.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Wait for the mic, Summer. Summer is a reporter for the Daily Pennsylvanian, which is the University of
right.
Pennsylvania's daily newspaper. Am I right?
Yeah, but I'm not here as.
No, this is off the record. Go ahead.
Do you
You're
think,
here as a person,
Yes.
not as a reporter.
No.
Okay, but it's okay if you were.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you think that journalism has, under the sense kind of the Trump administration, do you think it's improved, or kind of just how do you think the Trump administration impacted kind of journalistic practice?
Well, it's made it harder. It's made it harder, and it's made it more difficult because there's a lot of information out there now that is simply not true, and it's been put out there for totally partisan reasons. But having said that, there's been some great journalism. David Fahrenthold, who was the reporter who first did the story about Donald Trump's charities and his charitable habits, as it were. I mean, how would you feel if you're a reporter and and the city editor or whoever he is calls you in and said, I want you to go out and do a story about Donald Trump's charitable giving? I mean, you just want to run for the door. I mean, thinking what that would be. But he made a remarkable contribution. And I think I have always thought that Bob Woodward is the greatest reporter, not only of his generation, but of our time. And I think he enhanced that reputation with his latest book, written with Robert Costa. I think there's been some really good journalism. I think Maggie Haberman, who's just, you talk about characters.
Really?
I mean,
dogged, funny.
And she just never gives up. She reminds me a lot of Helen Thomas and how she used to be. But she just goes right at it, and she doesn't stop till she comes up with a story. And somebody who worked at the Times, and I won't embarrass them by using their name, said to me, she really is a secret weapon, because Trump knows her. And said every time we do something he doesn't like, he calls her up and just reams her up one side and down the other. And he said then he gives her a story. So he said, we've never had anybody quite like that. She's a really good reporter. And so I think there's some great journalism. And I think what this time, if nothing else, has illustrated, and I'm a reporter, I'm prejudiced about reporters and the role of journalism. I think it reminded us of how important it is to get true, accurate information, and how sometimes that really takes a lot of courage. And so I'm very proud of journalism, and I'm very proud to be a reporter. I don't do anything anymore, but I'm just glad they're there, and I don't know what it would be without them. I mean, I hate to be corny about this, but the only difference in a totalitarian society and a democracy In a totalitarian society, all the news comes from the government. In our society, the press presents a separate version of events that people can take and use to judge what the government is telling them. They have a second version of events to contrast with what the government is telling them. I think that's a really good thing, and I think you can't have a democracy. I think that single thing is as important to a democracy as the right to vote.
Summer, are you thinking about going into journalism? Is that an aspiration?
If you are,
Did Bob's answer encourage you?
but you know why I got into journalism? I didn't get into it for noble reasons of any kind. I just thought it'd be a lot of fun, and it was.
And because you
And
were
it
bad at
is.
physiology, too.
Yeah. And it's, I just think I'm having a more fun than if I'd gotten into comparative anatomy or something like that.
Okay, Bob, are you ready for a lightning round?
Okay,
Okay, so I toss out a name. You just give us a sentence
okay,
or a quick response. You can also pass. You get 3 passes.
okay.
Okay, here we go. Ready? Sam Nunn.
Sam Nunn was one of the most effective politicians that I've ever known, and what I always remember about Sam Nunn, and he's still very active, he's still working to reduce nuclear weapons around the world, and he's done that. And I admire him greatly.
Great. That was an easy one because you're a big Sam Nunn fan. Cokie Roberts.
Cokie was kind of the. I loved her. I knew her mother. Her mother was a member of Congress. Can I just? I know these are just.
You're breaking
flash
from the
points, but I wanna
lightning
tell
round?
you- I want to
Okay.
tell you.
Okay,
I'm
you only
gonna
get one of those,
I'm
though.
going to stretch the lightning a little bit. One
Somehow I knew this was going to happen,
you
but that's
knew
okay.
this was going to happen. One time I was in Louisiana. I was in New Orleans, and we'd been down there to cover. The president had been there, and in those days, if you did the story, you had to go back to the local station and feed it back to New York, so you missed the press plane. So I had gone out, getting ready to go out to the airport to catch the next commercial flight that was going back to Washington, and I was standing on the corner, and a police car pulled up, and it was Cokie Roberts in the back seat, and she said, "Are you going to the airport?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, get in." So I get in, and I said, "Well, this is an unaccustomed pleasure. I mean, how does this work?" She said, "Bob, let me tell you something. When you're in New Orleans, I'm a good person to know." And she just let it go at that.
That was a great one, actually. I like that lightning round. Okay, you don't get too many more stories on this, though. This is okay, here's one. Donald Rumsfeld.
I like Donald Rumsfeld. He was a man of great contradictions. He could be very kind, and at the same time, he could be kind of rude sometimes to the military.
Bob Schrum.
Bob Schrum was a political consultant, and he was a good one. He was a consultant to a number of people who ran for president. I liked him, and I wish him well.
Spiro Agnew.
It's kind of hard.
Well, we should take a poll here. How many people actually know who Spiro
who
Agnew
knows
is?
who Spiro
Oh, look at
Agnew?
this, Bob.
Yeah.
Okay, he made a mark, Spiro Agnew. What a jerk. Sorry.
But I mean,
I'm doing
he
your job.
literally took the money in paper sacks while he was the vice president. You know.
That is a lightning round answer. I love that. Okay, a couple more. Is this fun at all? Is this fun?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. John Glenn.
John Glenn was a wonderful guy. He sometimes I think he was too nice to be in politics. He literally was a very nice person, and I became friends with him and enjoyed being around him.
Eunice Kennedy Shriver.
She was a piece of work, and I greatly admired her.
This is Jack's sister, right?
Yeah, and this was when they took Eagleton off the ticket. You'll remember, and put Sergeant Shriver in as the vice president, as McGovern's the vice president. And Eunice would get on that plane, and that's where I first met Maria Shriver. She was a teenager, and she would come back and sit with us in the press section of the plane because she said, I don't want to be up there with all those old guys in the front. And but Eunice, she was a woman, she reminded me in some ways of my mother, who was quite a domineering person. She would come back there, and when she had something on her mind, I looked back one day, and she had grabbed me by both of my coat lapels, said, you just got to understand. I said, I understand. It's good. Got it. I got that. But I liked her.
Amon Carter Sr.
Amon Carter Sr. was the founder of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which was known as the Fort Worth in those days was known as where the West begins. Dallas in Fort Worth, we in Fort Worth remember Dallas is where the East peters out. There was great rivalry.
No bias here, right?
Between the two. But Carter was such a Fort Worth booster that when he went to Dallas, he always carried his own lunch. He didn't want anybody to think he ate I mean, really, this is true. He didn't want anybody to think he ate at a Dallas
I love
restaurant.
that. That's good. You are very good at this game. Okay, here's one. LBJ in 1948.
Now that takes longer than
I
just
know.
the
You.
lightning
I
round.
guess you got to tell the hat story, right?
My people often ask me, how did I become interested in politics? And it started in 1948 when we heard that Lyndon Johnson, who was running for the United States Senate at that time, not for president. This is the year that Dewey and Truman ran against each other. So anyway, the big news in our neighborhood was that Lyndon Johnson was coming to the vacant lot where we played baseball. And the reason it was such big news is because we heard he was coming in a helicopter, and we had never seen a helicopter. So at the appointed time, my dad, my mother, we all went down there, and everybody in the neighborhood was there. And all of a sudden, up in the sky, here's this thing that we'd never making all this noise, and then this over this horn. This is your candidate for the United States Senate, Lyndon B. Johnson. I'll be down to see you. Well, we didn't know if this was God or if it was some alien from. We didn't. I mean, it literally scared us. We didn't know what the hell it was. And so pretty soon in this cloud of dust, this helicopter lands, Lyndon Johnson gets out, and he just makes I can't remember anything he said, but, after that intro and everything, he makes this speech. And then at the end of the speech, he was wearing his Stetson. He took it off and threw it into the crowd, waved goodbye, got on the helicopter, and flew away. Well, we were, just well. I later told this story to Jake Pickle, who was the member of Congress who replaced Johnson when he left the House and got elected to the Senate. And he said, "Oh yeah." He said, "I was part of that." Said, "I was the hat catcher." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Let me tell you something. Lyndon Johnson was the tightest person on the face of the earth." Said he wasn't going to waste a hat on a political crowd. He said, so my job was to get out in front of the helicopter. When he saw me, he'd throw the hat to me. I'd get the hat, run around behind the helicopter, give it back to him, and then they'd fly away. Well, that's my favorite.
Well, I am glad.
After that, and Johnson, by the way, it was nobody had ever done anything like. He made 17 stops a day flying across Texas in a helicopter, and it was a whole new kind of campaigning. But after that, I was just sort of hooked on politics.
I'm glad you broke the rule for that one because that is such a great story. All right, two more lightning round, and then I have I'm going to ask you to read a couple paragraphs from this book as a way of concluding. Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. No, Robert F. Kennedy, no Jr.
I did not know him very well. He was a smart guy. I think he was too young to be Attorney General.
George W. Bush at a Rangers game.
Well,
Texas Rangers baseball.
Full exposure. My brother, who is a Democrat and who was a lawyer, and had served in the Texas legislature and was practicing law. And he and a guy he played golf with tried to buy the Texas Rangers baseball team. They didn't have any money or anything. They just didn't want the Rangers to be moved. They're going to move them to Tampa. So they made a bid. Well, they didn't get it, and along comes Bush and his team, and they got the team. And one day my brother's sitting in his law office, and somebody from George Bush's bunch said, we noticed that you were interested. Would you be interested in becoming an investor in the Rangers? And my brother said, yeah, I'd like to do that. That sounds like a lot of fun. Well, to make a long story short, my brother became the managing partner of the Texas Rangers, and they built it into quite a good business, and he also into a great team. And for my brother, it was just the love of his life. I mean, he loved doing it, and it was great. And later he was in the Bush administration, first as ambassador to Australia, and then for 4 years, and then 4 years as ambassador to Japan, too important. But he and George Bush were great, really good friends. And as I say, he was a Democrat, and George Bush, of course, obviously was a Republican. But Bush loved baseball too.
And you went to some of the games with Bush and your brother.
Yeah.
What kind of baseball fan was he? Is he?
He knew a lot about the game, and he, his dad played first base for
Yale. I think,
for
right?
Yale.
Yeah.
And then went into the Army. But George W. Bush was pretty funny about his own baseball career. He also went to Yale, and he went out for baseball, and he was playing, and the guy who was the coach had him go warm up and to go into a game, and then after he got warmed up, he said, I'm going to let the second baseman pitch. And George W. said, well, that kind of let me know that was the end of my baseball career. So after that, he became just a fan. But he really did love the game, as did his father.
One more lightning round. Eric Sevareid.
He was truly a smart man. I mean, I think probably Eric Sevareid was the first real intellectual, at least that other people thought he was an intellectual, not just himself, that I knew. But he was so intimidating. I remember the bureau chief, Bill Small, used to invite me to lunch, and he'd have different correspondents come. And the first time I was seated at lunch table with him, I couldn't believe it. I was just so. I don't think I said 3 words, and I'm not sure he knew I was even there for a while. But after a while, he did notice me. But I greatly admired him. What was interesting is he and Cronkite did not like each other at all.
Is that right?
No. And I think they were just from two different. Sevareid came at it from a very intellectual kind of place, and Walter was just a shoe leather wire service reporter, and I think in a funny kind of way, Eric kind of looked down on him, if that was possible. And I think probably in the end I think they were probably friends in the end. But there was intense competition. It's kind of interesting about Walter, and I think Ed Murrah also kind of plays into this. Ed Murrah became famous for the commentaries that he wrote, and that's what people liked about him. Walter became famous because he never gave his opinion.
That's right.
And people trusted him about that. Only once did he say, we need to get out of Vietnam. And when he said that,
And that may be the.
Well, Lyndon Johnson turned to his press secretary and said, if Walter thinks if that's Walter's position, then I don't have any support now.
That may also be the reason why Cronkite and Sevareid may not have gotten along, because Sevareid was all commentary in the Murrow tradition. And just one thing he said that my friends and I were all Sevareid fans. The special nature, this is one of his commentaries, the special nature of liberties is that they can be defended only as long as we still have them. It's the kind of aphoristic writing he would do. So the first signs of their erosion must be resisted, whether the issue be domestic surveillance by the Army, so-called preventive detention, or the freedom of corporate television. That vintage Severide.
Yeah. He was really a remarkable man, and he's also a really good writer.
So, Bob, I'd like to conclude just by nodding at the work. If you recited what the commuting was like at a certain point in your career, it would make us all, our blood pressure would rise. We would feel sleepless. It was tough for a while. Everybody okay back there? You did everything.
Yeah.
And you moved between Washington and New York, and in this memoir, there's a moment where you describe how you felt about it all in relation to the family and so forth. So I wonder if you would conclude by reading just a couple of paragraphs about that situation. This is at the point where you did not get the chair, you did not get the anchor job.
Yeah.
So it's the part I've marked.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. No one job is the key to happiness. Not usually is it the job that makes the man or the woman. It was not the anchor chair that made Walter Cronkite. It was Walter Cronkite who made the anchor chair what it came to be. It took me a long time to understand that, and it is a hard lesson for all of us. Real satisfaction does not come from getting a particular job. It comes from how well we do whatever job we have. New York would be a turning point for me professionally, and it would be a turning point for our family. My years of travel and the long, sleep-deprived days and nights in New York had put an enormous strain on our marriage and on my relationship with the girls. It had taken a long time for me to understand that being a good husband and a good father required as much work and practice as being a good journalist. For the first time in my life, I worked at it, and with practice, I got better at it.
Bob Scheiffer, everyone. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob Scheiffer. That was so much fun. We are going to, remember, there are books for sale in the other room, and I'm sure Bob will inscribe your copy. We're going to go out that door there. Maybe somebody can open it for us. We have a reception. Please hang out. I'm sure Bob would be happy to talk with you.
Sure.
So let's thank Bob one more time for coming. Yay. And I understand that we have a vast audience that's been watching us on live stream. So sorry we can't share our wine and beer with you, but we're glad that you tuned in. Thank you so much.